Welcome to the Human Resources for Small Business podcast, presented by Xenium HR. I'm your host, Brandon Laws. Whether you're an HR professional or a small business leader, each episode of this podcast is designed to bring you the latest in technical HR and leadership at your convenience. More content is available on our website at www.xeniumhr.com. Let's dive into today's topic. And we are back. It has been several months, Tyler, since we've done a book club podcast.
Gosh, yeah. Since before the holidays, well before the
holidays.
Yeah.
I can't even remember our last book, but I'm glad to have you back.
Yeah, good to be here.
We are going to do a discussion on The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, and
yes.
I love this book.
It's a great book.
Yeah, full disclosure, love this book. You loved it too, I think. We had a discussion as a team with the Xenium team, as we usually do with books, and I think the majority of people love this book as well. A couple but
yeah, I mean, I think with any business book or any type of improvement book, there can be some tedious points of it. It seemed repetitious at times, but overall, I thought it was a great book. I loved the way that he infused a lot of these anecdotal experiences into what his kind of.
I feel like it was relatable. There's a lot of good stories about workplaces, and it even stretches beyond workplace. Well, just workplaces that don't necessarily relate to us, but you can see it at a different level. Like they talked about the San Antonio Spurs, the NBA basketball team, and that was kind of, still an organization, still a culture, group of people, but most of us, who are listening to this podcast can't relate to that, but it's still people, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So what would you say is the thesis of this book, if you kind of packaged it up together and said this book is about X?
I think it's, in my opinion, it's about connections and kind of defining who you are as an organization and how you include and connect to your employees on multiple levels. Yeah. And I think he goes over that with, the 3 stages that he talks about in the book. That's what I would, it's just all about connections and belonging. He mentioned belonging cues, which I think are key, and he uses that throughout the book.
I think it's a good way to put it. So the book really covers 3 pillars, if you will. I think he calls them skills. And in this, so it covers the first skill, build safety. So building a safe organization, a safe space for people to bring them whole selves to work. Skill number 2 is share vulnerability. That's pretty intuitive there. And then skill 3, establish purpose. So I think for this podcast, we should kind of talk about each of those pillars, because the book, there are so many great stories, anecdotes about each of those areas. And I think that would be a good place to start for us. Yeah. So building safety, I think there was this story I absolutely loved where they talked about there was a competition between MBA business people, where they put them in groups together, very smart on paper, academics. And then they had them against kindergartners, and their objective was to take, I think it was marshmallows and toothpicks and things like that to
spaghetti,
build.
I think.
What was it?
Spaghetti?
Okay, so it was something with food and whatever, and they had to build this structure of some sort. And what they found in the studies was that the kindergartners would most of the time win, I think, or maybe all the time win. Yep. And I think from the conclusion of that was that, especially with academic observers, they would look and see that the kids would talk in short bursts. They would fail really fast and then make changes. And what else do you remember from that?
Yeah. So I think with them that they noticed too is there wasn't really an essence a leader per se that was kind of taking charge. They were all kind of working in tandem together. Shared purpose. They were failing together, and it was quick. It was a quick turn. If they fail, they try to improve. And it was that. Whereas in the other groups, with the MBAs and the engineers, they usually, if someone was just trying to kind of forcefully kind of establishing as kind of a leader, which can kind of make the team not function as well as it could.
Right. Well, it's funny because like if you're a leader by title,
right,
then naturally you want to take charge. And I think like with those MBA type people, the academics, they would probably want to take charge or say like, well, I'm qualified, so therefore like I should be able to figure this out. Well, then maybe the team isn't as cohesive as it is because they have a bunch of star players together. It's almost like a bunch, like an NBA basketball team. If you had like all superstars on one team, like that could be a disaster, right? Because everybody wants to shine.
Exactly.
Whereas these kindergartners, they're all just team players and they're all trying to work together, and so they end up solving it faster.
Exactly. Yeah. It is really just that shared purpose, that shared drive to complete something that they were tasked with. Whereas the MBAs and everything, it's like, oh, this is more like a competition. I need to be in a leadership position because that's what my title is. I need to kind of delegate tasks, which wouldn't really serve the purpose of the team building.
That experiment. It actually reminded me of the time, and you've done one of these escape room.
Yes.
So I read this book and then I did the escape room, and I didn't notice it at the time, but in reflection of like when we failed getting out of the escape room, I realized I'm like, okay, so we did it as a team, and I got my boss there, we got our president there, and it's like, you want to defer to them because they're the vocal ones, the leaders, but in actuality, you're better off if you all talk and communicate and work together, and it's a safe environment for everybody to speak up, even at the lowest levels, versus just defaulting to like, there's the leader, we're going to just look to them, because you can't accomplish it fast enough. You can't get out of the escape room or accomplish a project or a task if everybody isn't speaking and working together, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, it's you need to have that connection established with, and as we'll mention, maybe we'll bring it up in the later ones with essentially like the Navy SEALs, how they have that intuitive kind of connection together as a team. But you can't really turn to someone because they're in a leadership position and assume that they're just going to start guiding you in the right direction. It all needs to be flowing through a cohesive whole and not just an individual purpose. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the establishment of that training exercise with the marshmallows. Kind of.
I thought there were some really good descriptors in here. So I think when Daniel Coyle was doing studies for the book, he would go in and look at organizations who were really successful, and he would look and say, well, these are the safe organizations, and here's what they look like. They describe their group as a family. They're close in proximity, so maybe like desks together, open office environment, lots of eye contact, physical touch, lots of short energetic exchanges. Everybody talks to everyone, few interruptions, lots of questions, active listening, humor, laughter, and courtesies like please and thank you.
Yeah.
So I thought that those were interesting. Like, so a safe environment, solid culture, those are some of the attributes.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I did. I especially like the proximity notion, because it's like, especially if you're in a desk that's, far away from another team member or another person on a team, it's hard to build that kind of connection with them when you're, far away. I mean, we do have tools at our disposal with like email and new like Slack and Teams and stuff like that, but that's not face to face. That's not eye contact. That's not, getting really almost personal with them and kind of working together. So I think the proximity thing, I definitely think that there's something there. And it goes back to the Navy SEALs, and it goes back to, the pilots and everything, that, they're close proximity together. They've been with each other for a long time. Yeah. That's how they build those kind of intuitive type of responses. Which are key for teams to succeed.
There's one more anecdote and story I want to talk about on the safety part of it before we move on. And of course, I got to get this in there. So I love the NBA. And Greg Popovich is a well-known, highly respected coach in the NBA. San Antonio Spurs is who he's the coach of. And it goes well beyond Greg Popovich and his ability to lead, their GM, their ownership, all that. But they know what kind of culture they want. And so when they're looking for talent, and in the draft or maybe in trades or free agency, they have basically an assessment, and there's a checkbox that says Spur or not a Spur.
Yeah.
And if they check the box that says not a Spur, no matter how talented that person is, they will always pass on that.
Right. Yeah.
How interesting is that?
I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
I especially knowing that maybe these players are, just superstars and can game change.
Exactly.
If they're not part of that, or if they don't feel like they're part of that family, the Spurs family, then they're not going to even give them the time of day. They say we'll move on to someone else. But I thought it's a very interesting approach, especially with these nowadays with the super teams coming around and everybody's just buying up superstars.
Totally.
The Spurs are focused on let's establish our group, our family as a whole, and it's reinforced in the stories with Greg Popovich, seeing how he builds connections with his players and other people in the organization. He brings articles circled with like little stories from their hometown and ask them about that. That's all that safety, that inclusiveness.
I love that
he's trying to build, and make them feel like they're a part of something bigger than just a basketball team.
I love that part because the NBA is becoming, and a lot of our organizations we're not off limits to this. We're becoming where we have people from all over the world coming to work for us. And the Spurs, they have people from Europe, there's from Turkey and Argentina and Africa, and all these places where these very talented basketball players will come into America to play in the NBA. It's the dream, right? And so your point about he'll bring up these stories and probably do little history lessons with the team to make sure everybody's connected to each other and then to the overall purpose of the organization. And I thought that was a beautiful illustration, because if he didn't do that, how quickly would it fall apart? I mean, these people speak different languages for the most part, and if they weren't a part of that shared purpose, it would easily fall apart, because these people, they just want to be the best basketball player and make as much money as possible. And like, what shared purpose is there?
Because it transcends just, we're playing basketball, at least in Greg Popovich's mind. Or, he had, the daily briefings before trainings or matches, or he would ask them just general questions about, politics or movies, food. He just asked them just random things and what their thoughts are on those. And he's just trying to build these connections at a deeper level than just, I'm a point guard, I'm going to pass it to a shooting guard or what have you, in terms of, basketball structure. It's more like we're individuals as part of a family, and we want to get to know each other on a deeper level. And that's how he views would be, making a better team. A better group and organization.
Absolutely. There was an example later on in the book of this is actually switching to baseball. The Chicago Cubs coach, Joe Madden, he would, if like a player screwed up or made a bad choice or whatever, he would make it a point. So he'd have like this big fishbowl full of very expensive wines in labels. And so if a player screwed up or there's a miscommunication or something where there needed to be a teaching lesson, he'd make a player go take out a slip of paper, and it would have a very expensive bottle, and the player would be required to go buy that bottle and then come in to see the coach and open up the bottle and have a conversation.
Yeah.
Like that was beautiful. Like a coach or a leader, for any matter, they could scream and yell and chastise and like do all these things to say like, you were wrong there, but instead he's inviting somebody to have a conversation to like say like, how do we go forward and fix this? Like, that's safety right there.
Yeah, exactly. Opinion. And he's doing it through kind of a unconventional, kind of relaxed atmosphere, saying let's have a conversation to understand what was the misses here and where can we improve. And he got some good wine out of it. So I think
I like that.
He made out with that one.
Love the wine. Let's move on to vulnerability. So I love this topic. Obviously Brene Brown's got some amazing work on vulnerability, but we hear it in leadership books all the time, is that, there's a quote in the book that says vulnerability precedes trust. What do you think about that statement?
I think it's absolutely right. I think when you're vulnerable, you're welcoming others to say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know this.
Yeah.
I need some help. And that it's inviting people to come in there and try to give, their advice or to help them out when they need to. And that builds trust. That builds that kind of basic, kind of fundamental trust level that I think all leadership needs.
Okay. So on that note, do you remember that story about the plane going down?
Right. Yeah.
Can you tell that story?
Right.
That was a crazy illustration for vulnerability.
There was a United flight back in the late 80s that experienced something that never happened in aviation.
Engine went down or something.
They lost full hydraulics. They lost all control of the plane, and there wasn't even anything to prepare for this in sims or training, because this is 100%. You can't recover from this.
Yeah.
So
it's a complete failure of the plane.
Complete failure of the plane.
It's going down.
It's going down, and there's no way to recover. So we have pilots that are experience this on the flight, and they resort to it's almost like an automatic. They start resorting to this short bursts of conversation to try to establish what's going on and what they can do, and also there just happened to be a pilot, like a trainer.
Yeah.
In the first class, and he asked if he could go up there and if he could give any help, and the captain, who is the captain, you associate that title with I'm leading this. I'm leading this plane.
I'm the captain.
I'm the captain. I'm the highest form of responsibility here. He goes to the captain and says, "What do you need? What do you need from me?" The captain turns to the trainer and says, "What can you do? What can you help with? Let me any suggestion I'm welcome to." So he kind of resorted to this, even though I'm in this position of I'm the captain of this airline, of this airplane. I'm vulnerable enough to seek help from others.
Yeah.
And he put himself, especially in a crisis situation like they were in, he kind of let that vulnerability kind of show and say, "Hey, any suggestions? Let's work on it together."
Well, they showed some of the transcript from the cockpit, and it was interesting. Maybe they just pull out a snippet, but it was like these very short bursts of like, okay, there's one thing. Oh no, it just didn't work, and then somebody'd respond, and it's like, no, I don't got it, or I don't know what I'm doing, and so they just continue to communicate really fast, and then they were able to somehow keep the plane went down, but only a few people died versus like catastrophic, everybody.
There was a lot of loss of life on the plane, but a lot of people owe their lives to these pilots who are trying to get in an impossible situation, get this plane not only to an appropriate airfield, but to land it in a way that would minimize casualty. And they did they did the sims 28 other times, and each time they didn't even make it to the airfield.
Crazy.
So I mean,
insane.
It was
so
these micro speak,
like
these micro talk back and forth. It was and this perceived vulnerability where we need to work on this together.
Yep.
No one's taking the point on this. We're all working as a team. Yep. That was kind of
Could you imagine what would have happened if that captain would have said, "I'm the captain, I'm making all decisions," and then the other two just stayed silent?
Right. Yeah.
Nothing would have happened. They wouldn't have worked together. They wouldn't have came up with random ideas that could have saved them.
Yep.
And I think that's the risk, is that everything's top down. Leadership's not vulnerable, because then what if you basically shut out your contributors, your lower level employees, from great ideas that could save the business or the organization or everybody's got good decision making. And if you're not a leader who says, I don't know the answer. I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help? And
I think it's just that kind of response. Like, I don't know. I mean, that's okay. It's okay not to know everything. No one's saying you're omniscient in whatever field you're in, but that to have that vulnerability, say, "Hey, I don't know. I could. What are your suggestions, or what can we do to kind of find this out, or seek help in a way?" From a leader, that's that builds that trust from people who report to him and just general people in the organization that see this leader as he's strong. He's a strong leader, but also he knows when he needs help or she needs help. So it's great.
Let's end the podcast by talking about purpose. We talk a lot about purpose on the podcast, but I don't think we could ever say it enough, because if there's no shared goal with organizations, then it's hard to align people to it.
Right.
And it's hard to, for one, retain and attract the people, because if you are unclear about what the purpose is, I mean, like that's one of the first steps there. There's a great line in here defining what purpose is. So, quote, "Purpose isn't about tapping into some mystical internal drive, but rather about creating simple beacons that focus attention and engagement on the shared goal." End quote.
Right. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's really clear. And I think what's interesting is that, like, you would think if you talk about purpose in an organization, that your employees, people working for you, should know, and maybe even clients of yours, they should know what it is. And that's just simply not true. So there was a study by Inc. magazine, and they asked executives to predict the percentage of employees who could name the company's top 3 priorities. 64% of the executives said that employees could name them. But in reality, what was that number? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but it was low.
It was 2%. So I think this to me, this says, restate your purpose, restate your priorities, restate your values over and over and over again. Publish them, put them on the walls, talk about them in team meetings, because if people aren't aligned with that purpose, they're going to go off course.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's purpose and the kind of the values of the organization need to be ingrained in the employees that that work there, and not just that, but you have to show these values in action, because I think actionable metrics are what people respond to, and I think back of the the Johnson & Johnson back in the early 80s, the Tylenol cyanide poisonings, and so
terrible situation.
It was a terrible situation. This Tylenol was if people don't know, in the early 80s there was cyanide was slipped into several bottles, and I
think one worker put it into
someone. They actually don't know who it was.
Still don't know who it was.
No, they never found out who it was.
Geez.
But people died. 7 people died from these cyanide poisonings, and people were like, "Oh, Tylenol's done for. This is Johnson & Johnson owns Tylenol, and they're not going to recover from this." And Johnson & Johnson was meeting with the FBI and the police, Chicago police, and they're informing them, "Hey, you need to don't recall everything, just recall the
the one plant
from the one Chicago area where we got these cases from. They don't recall everything because I'll just cause mass panic, and it'll cost you guys hundreds of millions of dollars." Well, Johnson & Johnson, the executives there, they took that advice, but they said, "You know what? Our purpose and our values was to, they have this 311 word tenet, where it's just, it's their main purpose is to the doctors and to the people." So they said that's our primary focus. So they recalled everything, all Tylenol,
probably $100 million,
$100 million, that they recalled. But that was who they were as an organization. That was their purpose was to serve the doctors and the nurses and the medical people and then the general public itself. And it kind of transformed their business to be more of, into like a product focus, into more of like a safety focused organization, which I thought was just a fascinating.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a sad story, but there's a silver lining in it. Is that their purpose was their compass.
Yeah, exactly.
And they knew what they needed to do. The decision making is easy when you know what your purpose is. And I think that for any culture, that's what it's all about. Is if you're very clear about what you're meant to do as an organization, then decision making should be pretty easy.
Yeah. And that's kind of goes back to what I was saying about having that kind of actionable, kind of visual kind of response to your purpose, so that employees can see that, and not just writing on a wall or on a piece of paper. Actually seeing that in action means a lot more, and goes a lot farther in your organization to kind of establish that ingrained values set with all your employees.
Yeah, love it. Well, hey, this has been a fun discussion. The book is The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, and we just touched on just a little bit of the book.
There is a lot of stories.
We did cover the three main pillars of build safety, share vulnerability, and establish purpose. But go get this book; it's a great one. I'll put a link up to it. In fact, I'll even do a giveaway for this book because I loved it so much, and I think Tyler did too. I definitely would give it 5 stars out of 5 stars. Yeah, same with Tyler. So I'm going to do a book giveaway for this. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts, screenshot it. I'll do random three drawings for it. So send me the review, tweet at me, whatever you need to do. But I'll give away 3 books for that. So Tyler, any parting wisdom for us, buddy? What are you up to?
Oh, right now we're focusing a lot of pay equity and compensation. We're kicking that up in 2019, especially with the new Oregon Equal Pay Act and the Washington Pay Act too.
I think a lot of states are going to start. Well, we'll talk about that in another podcast because there's so much meat on the bone there. But I think a lot of states will probably start adopting the equal pay stuff.
California will be right down.
Yeah. Yep. So you're doing a lot of data analysis right
exactly.
now. Exactly. That way. Yep. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Great.
You're on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Yes.
Okay. Meuwissen is your Twitter handle.
Yep.
And then LinkedIn, just search for Tyler Meuwissen. I'll put links up in the show notes. Thanks for joining us for the podcast today. You can follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter and all those places. Thanks for listening today, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Human Resources for Small Business podcast. Subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to check out our blog at www.xeniumhr.com/blog and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn to hear about the latest in HR and leadership. The information on today's episode is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal or customized advice for you or your organization. This podcast is hosted and fully produced by Brandon Laws, that's me, and created and owned by Xenium Resources, Inc. For more information or to contact us, visit www.xeniumhr.com.